One dinner, 17 lives, and a single woman who would change everything. The Mississippi sun hung low over the plantation, casting long, sinister shadows across the fields. Celia wiped sweat from her brow. Her hands were calloused, her body tired. 17 years of slavery had carved lines into her skin and fire into her soul. Every lash, every insult, every stolen moment of dignity, it all burned in her memory. She moved through the kitchen silently, the wooden floorboards groaning beneath her. No one suspected her. No one suspected what was coming. The air smelled of roasting meat and boiling water, ordinary smells to anyone else. But tonight, these smells would become instruments of horror. Celia glanced at the knives lined up neatly on the counter. Her eyes were steady, focused. She remembered the laughter of the men upstairs, the plantation's richest, cruelest visitors, 17 of them. Each one had tormented her in some way. Tonight they would pay. In a way they could never imagine, her lips curved in a faint, bitter smile. The first spark of her plan had been born in silence, years of watching, waiting, listening, every insult, every glance, every step they took across her back, recorded in her mind. And now, she was ready. The fire in the hearth crackled. Its glow danced across her determined face. Celia's fingers moved deftly, every ingredient measured, every dish prepared with care, a pinch here, a stir there. It looked like an ordinary meal, but it was anything but ordinary. Outside, the men laughed and toasted their wealth. They never imagined the storm gathering in the kitchen. Celia paused, inhaling deeply. This was her moment. Years of pain and silence condensed into this single act. She whispered softly to herself, "They will remember me, whether they live or die." The first steps approached, oblivious to the horror awaiting them. The men filed into the kitchen. They joked, drank, and eyed the dishes with anticipation. Celia greeted them with a polite smile, hiding the fire in her eyes. Her hands served the first plate. They didn't notice the slight tremor in her fingers, the faint, untraceable bitterness in the food. The night had begun. 17 plates. 17 unsuspecting souls. Celia's heart raced, but her hands were steady. Every laugh, every toast, every careless bite brought her closer to justice. The kitchen was alive with the illusion of normalcy. Outside, the guests felt safe, invincible even. They had no idea that the woman they'd humiliated for nearly 2 decades held their fates in her hands. Her eyes flicked to the hearth again. The flames reflected in her eyes, bright, intense, unforgiving. Celia had planned this for months. Every detail, every moment of preparation had led to tonight, and nothing could stop her now. The first dish was taken. The second prepared, the third simmered. The men laughed, oblivious. Their voices bounced off the walls, confident and careless. But the night was shifting. Something dark was creeping closer with every bite. The hour of reckoning was near. Celia moved quietly. Like a shadow in the flames, she didn't speak. She didn't flinch. She only waited. 17 lives, hanging by a thread, and when the first sign appeared, the feast would change forever. A whisper of fear, a sudden cough, a fleeting glance. Tiny signals that the plan was working. Celia felt a thrill, cold and sharp, and cut through her chest. Years of pain had brought her here, and tonight justice would be served. On a plate, the men remained unaware. Their arrogance blinded them. The first taste, the first reaction, it would not be long now. 17 lives, 1 woman, and a night that would be remembered forever. If you want to see what happens at Celia's deadly feast, hit like, comment your thoughts and subscribe. The next is coming soon, and you won't want to miss it. The first bite was taken, and everything spiraled into chaos. Celia moved silently, her hands steady, her heart cold. The men gathered around the long plantation table, laughing, drinking, blind to the storm that awaited them. 17 lives, oblivious, each one filled with arrogance and power. Glasses clinked. Toasts were made, to wealth, to dominance, to life itself. Celia carried the dishes, each one carefully prepared. Every plate looked ordinary, Every aroma smelled inviting, but hidden beneath the surface was death. The first man took a bite, chewing slowly, savoring it. A cough. A sharp gag. He waved it off, blaming the smoke from the hearth or the wine. But Celia noticed the first spark of panic. It was happening. She moved to the next dish, placing it gently before another guest. The men laughed. Confident, arrogant, unaware, her eyes scanned them, cold, calculating. She remembered every insult, every lash, every stolen moment of her life. And now she had the power. The second man reached for his drink. His hand trembled. Sweat ran down his temple. He laughed nervously, trying to act normal, but the unease was spreading. Tiny coughs became louder, uneasy, shifting. A man staggered, clutching his stomach. Another stumbled into a chair, knocking it over. Chaos was slowly seeping into the room. Celia remained calm, serene, almost untouchable. She moved quietly among the chaos, serving the final dishes as if nothing had changed. The illusion of normalcy hid the horror she had unleashed. More coughs, more gasps. Fear spread across the table like wildfire. The men's laughter vanished. Some tried to leave, some doubled over in pain, some froze, eyes wide, staring at the plates that had betrayed them. Celia watched it all, her mind steady, her heart a cold furnace of satisfaction. Years of abuse, humiliation, and invisibility had led to this moment. Her vengeance was precise, her plan perfect. The kitchen became a chamber of panic. Plates toppled, wine spilled, chairs fell, screams echoed against the walls. 17 men, powerless, struck down by one woman who had been ignored for nearly 2 decades. The air was thick with terror and confusion. Celia's lips curved into a faint, grim smile. She had waited a long time for this. The first taste of revenge had been delivered, but she knew the night was far from over. The aftermath would come, and the consequences would be dangerous. Yet in this moment, she savored it. 17 lives had been touched by her plan, and history would remember the terror that unfolded at the Mississippi plantation that night. The feast had begun, and there was no turning back. If you want to see how Celia's deadly feast reaches its terrifying climax, hit like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe. The next is coming soon, and you won't want to miss the horror that follows. The room erupted into screams, and Celia watched it all unfold. Chaos had taken hold of the plantation kitchen. 17 men, once arrogant and confident, now gripped the table, clutching their stomachs. Sweat poured down their faces. Some vomited, some fell to the floor, writhing in agony. The smell of fear mixed with smoke and roasted meat. Celia stood in the shadows, calm as a predator. Years of cruelty had led to this night. Years of silence had been broken with the sharp edge of vengeance. Her eyes scanned the room, watching every twitch, every gasp, every flinch. The men's laughter was gone, replaced with panic, confusion, horror. A man toppled backward, knocking over a chair. Another gasped, clutching his throat. Eyes wide, he looked at Celia, but there was nothing she could do to help him. Nothing but witness the storm she had unleashed. The first wave of screams turned into chaos. Plates and glasses shattered on the wooden floor. Wine spilled across the boards. Dark and sticky, Celia moved among the shadows, almost ghost-like, serving the last of the dishes. No one suspected a thing from the woman who had long been invisible. No one suspected the calm behind her eyes. The men tried to run, but the room felt smaller, tighter. Their steps were unsteady. They stumbled into one another, panicked and confused. Each bite of Celia's carefully prepared dishes had done its work. The pain spread quickly. The fear was palpable. The room became a maelstrom of suffering. Some men collapsed entirely, their faces pale, their hands clawing at the air. Others staggered, knocking over furniture, unsure where to go. Celia remained silent. Her heart pounded, but her face was still calm. The horror she had orchestrated had taken on a life of its own. Her vengeance had reached its peak. The kitchen once a place of preparation and servitude, had transformed into a chamber of terror. The screams grew louder. A man tried to shout for help, but his voice cracked and faltered. Another grabbed the nearest chair, swinging it wildly in confusion, yet none could escape the invisible trap she had laid for them. Celia stepped back, letting the chaos unfold. She had planned every detail with precision, every dish, every ingredient, every movement. It had all led to this moment, and the results were beyond what she had imagined. Bodies twisted, faces pale, eyes wide with disbelief. 17 men, brought low by one woman who had been dismissed for years. A scream pierced the air. Louder than the others, Celia flinched slightly, but only for a moment. This was the culmination of her life under chains, of the years of being ignored, humiliated and beaten, and now she was visible. Now she was feared. The first few men had fallen completely unconscious. The others struggled, desperate for water, for relief, for help. But the plantation, usually a place of order, was now a nightmare. The fire in the hearth flickered, casting long, grotesque shadows across the walls. It seemed to dance with the terror in the room. Celia moved closer, quietly observing the final reactions. Tried to crawl toward the door. Some cried out for mercy, but none would. Escape this night unscathed. Her plan had worked perfectly. Her vengeance had been delivered in full. The chaos reached a crescendo. Screams, coughs, crashes, an orchestra of horror. And in the midst of it all, Celia remained the eye of the storm. She had taken years of pain and turned it into power, into control, into fear. And as the last few men began to collapse, she felt a strange, cold satisfaction. 17 lives had been touched. Irrevocably, she had become more than a woman. She had become a force, a shadow of vengeance that no one could have predicted. Night would be remembered. The plantation would never be the same, and history would carry her name forward. Whispered in fear, Celia finally stepped back, letting the last echoes of screams fade. The room was silent, except for the crackle of the hearth. The deadly feast had reached its peak. The first act of vengeance was complete. And yet, the consequences of this night were only beginning. The lives she had touched were forever altered, and hers would soon face their own reckoning. If you think you can handle the terrifying conclusion, hit like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe. Reveals the chilling aftermath of Celia's deadly feast, and you won't believe what happens next. The screams had faded, but the terror was far from over. The plantation was silent, except for the crackling fire in the hearth. Celia stood alone. The aftermath of her plan spread around her. 17 men, once full of arrogance, now lay in agony or unconscious. The kitchen smelled of fear, blood, and the faint bitterness of what she had added to their feast. Her hands were steady, her face calm, but her mind raced. She knew the consequences would come. The master of the plantation would not forgive this. Neighbors, authorities, all would come looking, and she had to be ready outside. The sounds of confusion began. Footsteps, voices, shouts. The men who had survived struggled to alert others. Word spread quickly across the plantation. Something terrible had happened in the kitchen. By dawn, the entire estate knew. The master stormed in furious, disbelief written across his face. He tried to comprehend the scene before him, the fallen men, the chaos, the overturned chairs. His anger was sharp, cutting. He demanded answers. Celia watched silently, her expression unreadable. No apology, no plea, no fear. The master's wrath could not undo what had been done. Authorities were called. Investigations began. Witnesses whispered, pointing fingers, but none could fully explain what had happened. Celia's presence was known, but the true extent of her actions remained a mystery. The men who had survived described the event as a nightmare. Some swore it was poison. Others said it was divine punishment, but no one suspected the quiet, observant woman who had served them the deadly feast. Celia moved carefully through the aftermath. her mind calculating. She had planned every step of her vengeance. But she had not planned the full response. The plantation was a powder keg now, and she was at its center. Rumors spread beyond the estate. Neighbors whispered about the deadly feast that had taken 17 lives. Some avoided the plantation altogether, afraid of what might happen next. Celia remained unseen, a shadow in the chaos, but her fame or infamy was growing. Stories of her actions reached other plantations, stories that made people tremble. The master tried to restore order, but the damage was done. 17 lives had been altered forever. 17 men would never again walk with arrogance. And Celia, she had claimed her place in history, though it came with a price. The authorities eventually found her. The trial was brutal. Everyone wanted to know why a single woman had committed such a shocking act. Her calm demeanor in court unnerved the onlookers. Her story of years of abuse, cruelty, and humiliation shocked even those who had lived harsh lives, yet few truly sympathized. 17 men were dead, and justice demanded a reckoning. Celia was sentenced, but the legend of her deadly feast lived on. People spoke her name in hushed tones, in kitchens, in plantations, in the fields. Celia's Last Supper, they whispered, a story of vengeance, of justice, of terror, and though she was gone, the tale haunted those who remained. It served as a warning, a chilling reminder that even the quietest, most unseen person could change everything, even turn the world upside down. Celia's name became a legend, a shadow over Mississippi, a story passed down, whispered around fires and told in secret. Her vengeance was complete. The deadly feast would never be forgotten. The screams had faded, but the fear endured, and in the hearts of those who knew her story, Celia would live forever. If you found this story chilling, hit like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe. We have more dark, suspenseful tales from history coming, and you won't want to miss them. Even after the screams faded, the shadow of Celia's feast lingered, and fear spread like wildfire. The plantation was no longer the same. Neighbors avoided it, crossing the fields quickly, eyes downcast. Whispers followed every traveler. 17 men dead. And she did it alone, they said. Celia's name traveled faster than any gossip, carried by trembling voices. Children were warned to never wander near the estate. Women whispered the story in kitchens and washhouses. Men glanced nervously over their shoulders. The legend of the deadly feast had begun, but for Celia, life became a constant balance between fear and freedom. The authorities were relentless. Investigators combed the plantation. They questioned slaves, servants, and neighbors. They searched the fields, the kitchens, the barns. They wanted answers, but no one could fully explain the horror of that night. Celia moved cautiously, aware that every glance could betray her. Some feared her, some admired her, but all were changed by what had happened. The master of the plantation was broken. He had lost control. 17 men were gone, and the fear of what might come next haunted him. Orders were barked, guards stationed, every corner watched, yet the shadow of Celia's vengeance remained untouchable. She had vanished from plain sight. But stories of her actions grew with each telling. Neighbors spoke of her silently, as though the mere mention of her name could summon danger. Some claimed she had powers beyond a mortal woman. Others said she had been touched by something darker, a force that ensured justice was served. The plantation itself became a place of caution. Work slowed. Fear whispered in every wind. No one dared challenge the staff, who remained. No one dared speak out of turn. The surviving men trembled at the memory of that night. They avoided the kitchen. They avoided the rooms where laughter had once filled the air. The echo of Celia's vengeance haunted their every step. Even years later, travelers passing by reported strange sounds in the plantation, footsteps in empty halls, whispers from abandoned rooms. Some swore they saw a shadowy figure in the kitchen window. Celia's presence lingered. Long after she was gone, Her story spread to other plantations, whispered by slaves and masters alike. The tale of Celia's Last Supper became more than a story. It became a warning, a lesson, a legend. People began to change their behavior, fearing the wrath of those they had oppressed, even beyond Mississippi. Her name traveled. Stories claimed that she had escaped capture. Others said she faced justice, but even then, her shadow haunted those who remembered. The deadly feast became a symbol of unseen power, of quiet fury, of vengeance that could not be ignored. Celia had been invisible for so long. Now, she was unforgettable. The plantation tried to rebuild. Life returned slowly, but the echoes of that night never truly vanished. The halls, the kitchens, the fields, all carried the weight of fear. The surviving men changed, cautious, haunted, never the same again. And for Celia, her story was told in hushed tones, a mixture of fear, respect, and awe. She became a ghost in the minds of those who had witnessed her wrath, a legend for generations. Even decades later, her Last Supper was remembered, whispered, and feared. It was more than a story, it was a reminder. Cruelty has a cost, and those who are underestimated can wield power in ways no one expects. The shadow of Celia's vengeance stretched far and wide, and even as the sun set over the plantation fields, the memory of that night burned bright. The dead were gone, but their story and hers would live forever. If the legend of Celia's deadly feast sent chills down your spine, hit like, comment what you think happened next, and subscribe. We'll uncover the whispers, the rumors, and the mysterious fate that followed her after that fateful night. Celia vanished, but no one ever forgot the shadow she left behind. The plantation was quiet now, too quiet. Whispers of that night lingered like smoke, drifting through every hallway, every field, every heart. No one saw her leave. No one knew where she went. Some said she fled into the swamps of Mississippi, disappearing into the dense fog and twisted trees. Others claimed she was caught by the authorities, but the details were murky, lost to time. The surviving men were haunted. Each of them carried the memory of screams, the taste of fear, and the knowledge that they had underestimated. Celia's disappearance became another part of the story, another layer of mystery. In a tale already soaked in terror, travelers passing near the plantation reported strange sightings, figure in the woods, silent and swift, moving with impossible precision. Some swore it was Celia, others claimed it was the ghost of her vengeance. Wandering, ensuring justice was never forgotten, locals told tales at night, warning children, never underestimate the quiet ones, or they may become your last supper. The plantation tried to return to normal. The master attempted to restore order, but the fear lingered like a stubborn shadow. Workers whispered in kitchens, slaves exchanged nervous glances in fields. Even those who had never met Celia felt her presence in the stories passed down. Years later, the legend had grown. Celia was no longer just a woman. She was a symbol, a force of reckoning. Some said she joined other escaped slaves, moving quietly from town to town, helping those in need, and leaving her mark on anyone who underestimated her. Others claimed darker tales, that she remained in Mississippi, hiding in plain sight, watching, waiting, ready to strike if her justice was needed again. The line between fact and myth blurred, but one thing was certain. No one forgot her. Her name was whispered in fear, her story told in awe, even decades later. The plantation had never fully recovered. Rooms remained locked. The kitchen where the feast occurred was avoided. Some claimed that at night you could hear faint sounds, clinking dishes, footsteps, or the soft, eerie hum of a woman moving through the shadows. Was it Celia, or the memory of her wrath? No one could say. And the men who survived carried a permanent reminder of their arrogance. Each bite of that Last Supper had changed them forever. And Celia, she had claimed her freedom, but at a cost. Her life remained a mystery. Some believed she died quietly, far away from the plantations, her vengeance complete. Others swore they saw her many years later, older, hardened, but still carrying the shadow of that night in her eyes, and wherever she went, her story traveled, a warning, a chilling memory, a lesson in power, patience, and revenge. The legend of Celia's Last Supper became a ghost story for slaves and masters alike, a story of what happens when cruelty is met with silent, unstoppable fury. Even today the tale lives on, whispered in old houses, told around fires, written in journals, passed down as a dark warning. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Celia's name became immortal, her vengeance eternal, and though the shadows of that night faded from the plantation, they never disappeared. The memory of the deadly feast, the chaos, and the power of one woman who refused to remain invisible would haunt history forever. If Celia's story sent chills down your spine, hit like, comment what you think happened to her, and subscribe. Will reveal the final chilling legacy of her deadly feast, and you won't want to miss the haunting conclusion. 17 lives were lost, but the shadow of Celia's Last Supper would never die. The plantation lay quiet, but not peaceful. The rooms were empty, the fields still carried echoes of that fateful night. Neighbors whispered in hushed tones about the woman who had dared to strike. Back, Celia's name was spoken with fear, awe, and a strange reverence. Some said she vanished into the swamps. Unseen, others claimed she walked freely among towns, a silent force of justice and revenge. But her legend grew louder than her presence. The surviving men were broken men, their arrogance gone, their confidence shattered. Every meal they ate, every glance they shared with others carried the memory of that night. Even strangers who had never met Celia felt the weight of her story. The plantation tried to rebuild. The master imposed strict rules, hoping to reclaim control, but fear had taken root, deeper than authority could reach. Workers whispered, "She sees everything. She knows everything." No one dared speak too loudly, move too quickly, or question the strange calm that lingered after the chaos. Celia's revenge had not only struck the arrogant, but had reshaped the very soul of the estate. Her actions became a lesson, whispered in kitchens and fields. Cruelty has a cost. Time passed, yet her legend refused to fade. Travelers told stories of the deadly feast, of the quiet woman who turned the world upside down in a single night. Some claimed to see her in the shadows, watching silently. Some said she intervened to protect the oppressed, striking fear into anyone who dared exploit others. Celia's presence became larger than life. Her story blurred the line between history and myth. Decades later, the plantation was just another house in Mississippi, but locals still avoided the old kitchen. They said the dishes sometimes clinked on their own. They said shadows moved where no one should be, and they whispered her name, Celia. It was a reminder, a warning. The deadly feast had ended, but the message endured. Power comes with responsibility. Cruelty invites vengeance, and even the quietest, most invisible person can leave a mark that echoes through history. Celia's actions had changed the lives of 17 men, but more than that, they changed the hearts and minds of everyone who heard her story. She had been a slave, ignored, abused, unseen, yet she became a force that could not be contained. Her Last Supper was more than a meal. It was a declaration, a symbol, a haunting legacy. Generations later, the story was still told in classrooms, whispered warnings, and tales passed down by those who dared remember. It became a lesson carved into the very soil of Mississippi. Never underestimate those who suffer in silence. Celia had vanished physically, but her shadow remained, her feast, her vengeance, her legend. They were eternal. And every time someone heard her name, the horror of that night flickered back to life. 17 lives lost, countless hearts changed, and one woman who refused to be invisible. History remembered her. The plantation remembered her, and the world in its own way would never forget. The deadly feast had ended, But the echo of Celia's wrath would haunt forever. If Celia's story sent chills down your spine, share your thoughts in the comments. And subscribe. We explore more dark, suspenseful, and true historical tales just like this. And you won't want to miss the next haunting story.